right, guest number 2 on Section 415, following Buster Posey and his debut on Tuesday. David Lombardi here with us on Friday. He covers the San Francisco 49ers for the San Francisco Standard. David, I'll say it, tough act to follow.
I know. You guys had Buster Posey on first, and I'm honored. In my world, the Buster Posey is John Lynch. I think there's a lot of similarities between John and Buster, former players. Buster's going to be in the Hall of Fame soon. I would hope, and John is obviously a Hall of Famer, but they both bring that Captain America vibe to running their organizations. So cool for me to be on right after him, and congratulations. I know that you worked hard to get this thing launched, and I'm happy to contribute as often as you'll have me.
Well, thank you. We're really looking forward to this. We're going to have you on throughout the 49ers season and, of course, throughout the offseason as well, transactions, the draft. We really look forward to bringing our San Francisco Standard reporters into this show and making you a key part of it all. So, David, this has been a fascinating start to the 49ers season. They're 4-1 so far. I think there's so many different things that we'll talk about, but the very first thing that I wanted to dive into on today's episode of Section 415 is the fact that through 5 games, we've seen a steady dose of 2 different quarterbacks. The 49ers began the year with their $265 million man and Brock Purdy, and it's been Mac Jones who's had to lead them to 3 victories considering Purdy's early season toe injury. Just what have you made of their ability to go back and forth and not lose a whole lot on offense given the challenging dynamics of the situation?
Well, I don't know if you call it fitting or ironic. Maybe it fits the definitions of both, but when Brock Purdy first got started in 2022, he was down at number 3 in the pecking order, and the 49ers needed to get into the quarterback depth to win a lot of games, and they ended up in the NFC Championship game, and then very tragically, it all came crashing down because they ran out of quarterback depth. They literally didn't have a healthy quarterback to finish that NFC title game. So I think that we're all products of our experiences in life, and the 49ers learned the very hard way back in 2022 that you need numbers at that quarterback position. They might have relearned that in 2024 when Purdy went down and the backups weren't very good in either Braden Allen or Josh Dobbs. So they invested a little bit more in QB2 this year. They created a situation that was a lot like 2023, and they didn't have to break the glass in case of emergency in 2023. But they had the guy who's actually rated as the top QB in the game early this season as their backup that year, and Sam Darnold. And that was a quarterback rehab project. So they went back to the quarterback rehab well with Mac Jones, somebody who was a first-round pick who didn't see success in his saw some in New England, but it went downhill there fairly quickly. And they've said, you know what? Success in this league is driven so much by setting, organization, coaching, teammates. We trust our setting. We trust our program. That's what the 49ers said with Darnold, and it worked, and he got his career back on track. And that's what they're doing with Mac Jones right now. And I'll tell you what, like in this league, the 49ers know best. You need at least 2. And we're seeing it play out right now. Now, Kerry, neither of these 2 guys is fully healthy. So that's why we saw Purdy come back in week 4, because he was more available than Mac Jones for that game against Jacksonville. Now Purdy is more hurt than Jones as he deals with a very tricky toe situation. That ended Patrick Willis's career, a turf toe injury. It's why Joe Burrow has needed to have surgery. Brock's is not as serious as those, but it can become serious if it's not tended to properly. And in a way, the 49ers now have a little bit of a luxury, even though Mac is dealing with a knee issue. He can bridge that gap until Brock is healthy again.
I think one of the fascinating dynamics of this quarterback situation the 49ers have dealt with through the first 5 weeks of the season, David, is that Brock Purdy and Mac Jones are very different quarterbacks. You've written about it all season long thus far for the Standard, and that Brock's escapability is really one of his greatest weapons, and Mac is, let's just say, he doesn't have that escapability gene that Brock has. He is stoic in the pocket, but it's a different offense, and Kyle Shanahan has had to adapt pretty quickly when Mac Jones has been the starter for this team.
Well, Mac, let's not completely undersell him. He played tennis growing up in Jacksonville, and the 49ers are going back to Florida, Tampa Bay, this weekend. So maybe Mac is going to be used to that climate. It should be 85 and humid. But even though he's not fast, he's joked that he runs like Forrest Gump, and that's Forrest Gump before all the leg braces came off. He went to Alabama, so I think that's fitting. But he's not fast on a straight line, but he can really, I think, dance around thanks to the tennis footwork in the pocket, and that's helped Mac a lot. But in general, And obviously generalizing can sometimes get you in trouble, but I'll try to add as much context as possible. Mac brings what Jimmy Garoppolo brought when Jimmy was healthy to this offense. And a lot of people forget that Jimmy was a good quarterback who was top 6, top 7 in efficiency. At his very peak before Jimmy tore his ACL, he actually was the top guy in the league in that 5-game stretch in 2017. But after the ACL, he lost some of the mobility, and it's that mobility that Brock Purdy has that a lot of other guys in the league, especially guys who are as accurate as he is, they don't have that mobility. When the 49ers went out to draft Jimmy Garoppolo's replacement in 2021 and they traded up, a lot of people thought they were going to draft Mac Jones. The reason that they didn't is because Kyle Shanahan, after trading all that capital to go up to number 3, wanted a higher ceiling than a Mac Jones or a Jimmy Garoppolo, if we're going to compare those two guys. So they went for Trey Lance, and obviously that grand experiment failed. That's a discussion to have for another time. But basically, at the time, Kyle Shanahan said that he wanted somebody who ran like Lamar Jackson and threw like Drew Brees. He wanted that combination in a quarterback. And very ironically, I think this is the right use of that word, the year later, with the very last pick in the draft, they got Brock Purdy, who's got a crazy good 10-yard split. Like, he's got excellent burst behind the line of scrimmage, and he's also very accurate as a passer. So Shanahan found this coveted combination of accuracy with the arm and speed, or at least quickness with the legs, in Brock Purdy. And then in a roundabout way, he brought Mac Jones back to be the backup, but Jones doesn't bring the same elite upside that Brock Purdy does because of what you said, because of that lack of mobility. So what you saw against the Rams the other day was fascinating, because it was the same exact game plan that the 49ers used to beat the Rams back when Jimmy Garoppolo was the quarterback. Very quick release, short passes, really difficult stuff. No, I'm not trying to undersell what he did, but it was a very, very different game plan than what the 49ers hope to execute with Brock Purdy. They hope to open up the explosiveness of the offense once he does return from the toe injury.
Through 5 games, it's 3 Mac Jones wins, 2 Brock Purdy wins, or excuse me, 1 Brock Purdy win and 1 Brock Purdy loss, and 2 Brock Purdy starts for this team. But the one constant, David, through 5 games is the player who we'll focus on with our second headline here. We open up the show talking about the quarterback situation. The second headline we want to discuss is Christian McCaffrey's health and availability this season for the San Francisco 49ers. Their year was derailed last season when McCaffrey went down with the Achilles and then came back and suffered the knee injury that kept him out for the remainder of the season. McCaffrey, ironically, is not having much success finding running lanes behind this offensive line for the San Francisco 49ers, but he has been an absolute weapon in the passing game for both Mac Jones and Brock Purdy, and he has been incredibly important to ensuring that this 49ers offense can fire on all cylinders despite the injuries that it's suffered thus far.
Yeah, anybody who says that Christian McCaffrey has slowed down just based on looking at his running stats, well, watch the receiving game, because he's on pace, Kerry, for 1,300 receiving yards in this season. The most 98% of wide receivers in this league would be happy with that production. And that's what McCaffrey's given the 49ers, not only working out of the backfield, but he's lining up as a pure wideout a lot of these times. The game against New Orleans was the craziest. He was lined up out wide, working against the corner, and he delivered on 3rd and long. Like, there was a third, I think it was 12 or 13, where he routed up the DB just like a wide receiver 1 does, and he's putting up wide receiver 1 numbers, while I would say taking more punishment than a wide receiver 1, because a lot of the passes he's catching are further underneath, so you're getting tacklers coming downhill, often linebackers away a little bit more, safeties away a little bit more than corners are laying the hurt on him. So, and he's still popping up and doing it again, and then having to deal with a run game that is dealing with all kinds of issues right now for the 49ers. And I mean, they're at 3.1 yards per carry, which is last in the NFL. But second to last in the NFL are the Philadelphia Eagles with Saquon Barkley. Nobody's saying that Saquon is past his prime. I think that both of these teams, who are run-dominant teams over the past few years, are taking the full brunt of opposing defenses. They're throwing everything they can at the run game to force the 49ers and the Eagles to throw. And the unfortunate, the guys who are victimized by this are the statistics of Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley on the ground. And good thing for the 49ers is they've gotten the quarterback play to burn these defenses who are focused on the run games. And one way that the 49ers and the Eagles, too, are able to make these defenses pay is by using the running backs themselves in the pass game, and that's what Christian McCaffrey has been doing at such a high level.
Yeah, I want to dive a little bit deeper on Christian McCaffrey in the run game because you mentioned it, 3.1 yards per carry. It's not the 49ers standard. It's not what they expect, but there have been some underlying numbers, and you've written about this for the San Francisco Standard. You just alluded to some of this as well. McCaffrey has set a career high in missed tackles in a game this season. He has had one of his most efficient performances as a rusher this year. What's the key to McCaffrey fully unlocking? Is it the return of George Kittle and Ben Barch?
That's it. You hit it.
Okay, yep. There we go. Let's dive in on that then.
Over the last 2 years, when George Kittle's been on the field, the 49ers have averaged about 4.1 yards per carry. When George Kittle hasn't been on the field, it's been 3.1. I think it might even be higher, actually. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's at least a yard. The delta is at least a yard. And that's, I don't know if I could find anything more conclusive for you, but that's a statistical representation of what we see on the field. When George Kittle is on the field, when Kyle Juszczyk is on the field, the 49ers can out-leverage almost anyone because George is one of the best receivers in the game. I'm not just talking tight ends. I'm talking receivers, period. And he's also one of the best run blockers. So just by definition, when he's out on the field, the defense is not going to be sure if it's a run or a pass. You can get them in the personnel formation that you want to. You can force them to be in something a little bit lighter to be able to cover his speed. And once they're in something a little bit lighter, once they're back on their heels instead of on their toes, you can call that outside zone run play. In this league, it is often a margin of millimeters if something works or it doesn't, right? So just the fact that Kittle's out there and Kyle Shanahan can leverage defenses makes a huge difference, as you can see in the statistics. The on-off splits for George Kittle for that run game are massive. And I think that's what the 49ers are missing most. It's not the only thing they're missing. They're also dealing with some shoddy interior line play. And I don't want to throw Connor Colby under the bus, but this is a rookie 7th rounder who hurt his groin 2 days before his first career start, had to be thrown in there because Ben Barch, the veteran, got hurt. So obviously you're dealing with that. On the inside, you're dealing with the loss of Kittle, and then you're dealing with the Eagles example I brought up, and that's because Philadelphia is one of the most respected O-lines in the league. They do not have the same injury problems that the 49ers have. They are still dealing with a run game that has been borderline anemic this year because that's the way that teams are playing these elite running backs.
So we open this episode talking about the 49ers quarterbacks, Brock Purdy and Mac Jones. We continue with headline number 2, Christian McCaffrey. Let's naturally move down to headline number 3 here, David, and that is the wide receiver position, the ever-evolving wide receiver position for the San Francisco 49ers, where Ricky Pearsall got off to such a hot start, and Brandon Ayuk is still looming as someone who could help this team later in the season when he comes back from the ACL and major knee reconstruction that he had last year. But I just want to zoom in really quickly on last Thursday night against the Los Angeles Rams. Out of nowhere, a player who opened the season on a different team, Kendrick Bourne, coming up with 10-plus catches for 140-plus yards. How did this happen? Like, how did Kendrick Bourne find himself in the 49ers offense and putting up these kind of numbers in a crazy game against the Rams?
Well, first off, Kendrick had to play the X receiver on Thursday. So naturally, he was moved up into a position that saw a lot of first read attempts. Normally, Kendrick Bourne would be further down the progression because the 49ers would actually have one of their top 3 receivers available. They didn't, so the classic next man up, right? Somebody's got to play the X. And that's featured in Kyle Shanahan's offense, and it was Kendrick. And the 49ers' game plan was quick release. Mac Jones got rid of the football on average, snap to release 2.4 seconds, which is about the same as Jimmy Garoppolo in those games against the Rams in 2021. That was the big win they had in Week 10 on Monday Night Football. It wasn't about holding the ball. It was about grabbing the ball as the quarterback, getting the ball out, neutralize the pass rush with a lot of short throws and emphasize yards after the catch. So Deebo Samuel, big game back then. Brandon Ayuk, big game back then. Obviously, neither of those two guys available to the 49ers right now. So it was up to Kendrick Bourne to step into that role. Now, Kendrick Bourne is no regular guy off the street, right? I know that the 49ers signed him as a free agent. I know that he was available, but New England actually paid him decent money twice. Yeah. He was extended by New England, and it was a contract that the 49ers weren't in financial position to match. That's why he left in 2021. He was really Jawan Jennings before Jawan Jennings for the 49ers as the third wide receiver. So this is a vet. This is somebody who's played all the wide receiver positions under Kyle Shanahan because they cross-train. You've got to play the X, you've got to play the Z, you've got to play the F. Remember last year in SoFi, Jawan Jennings went crazy.
11 catches.
Z. Yeah, he put up a Jerry Rice-type stat line in that game. I mean, we were comparing it to Jerry's top games with the 49ers. It was historic, and that was because he had to slide up into the Z position, which was Deebo Samuel's position, because Deebo was hurt for that game. So the way that they cross-train these receivers, in theory, they should be able to perform at positions outside of their natural home position, but that's only theoretical. Then they've actually got to do it during the game. And I think, a lot of when you say, okay, how did Kendrick do this? He and Mac Jones connected for like 1,000+ yards over the course of their time together in New England. He was one of Mac's, if not Mac's favorite targets, one of his favorite targets in New England. So they've got that rapport built in already, and I think it really worked for Mac to be throwing, looking for his first read most of the time, and Kendrick to be his first read most of the time. There was one critical drop, but he definitely made up for it.
So one more quick question on the wide receiver unit for the 49ers, David. And obviously, they're integrating Demarcus Robinson in. He's the free agent who sat out the first 3 games of the season due to an NFL suspension. They're hoping to reintegrate Brandon Ayuk come the middle of this season after the ACL injury that he suffered last year. Ricky Pearsall is in year 2, but he is obviously dealing with the knee injury that kept him out last Thursday against the Los Angeles Rams. In your opinion, what does this unit look like when it's at its best? Like, what is the depth chart when the 49ers have everyone fully healthy and ready to go?
Yeah, so obviously that's a golden goose kind of thing, right? I don't know if we'll ever get to that, but
good point.
One can dream, and I think they want to get at least 80% of the way there, right?
Yeah.
I think once it's 80 to 85% of the way there, if they can get that, this offense can be elite. It has already shown that ability in 2023. I understand that there's no more Deebo Samuel, but the 49ers have other guys now that I think can pick up some of that slack. But whenever you're talking about the receivers, you can't have this discussion without mentioning Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle, because this offense is about positionless skill positions. Those guys contribute to the receiving core in the pass game as much as the actual labeled wideouts. So obviously you've got to have both of those guys. Then, I mean, in a perfectly ideal world, you do get Brandon Ayuk back. And even if he's not full strength, he is good enough to play that X position. And the reason I put him at the X is because that one is often on the play side so important for blocking in the run game. I mean, that's it's not just George Kittle who's not out there. They're not getting their premier blocking from the wide receivers, which I think is also hampering the run game. So Ayuk at the X, and I think he'll still be able to block when he returns. He might not have the burst that he had before the injury. That might take a year to fully get back, because he really did tear up his knee. But I think that he helps you in the run game, and that could by extension help you in the pass game. Ricky Pearsall can be your number 2. He's on pace for over 1,000 yards, and he missed this past game. So Ricky, I mean, as a number 2 would be awesome. Jawan Jennings, I mean, he's the best number 3 the 49ers have had under Shanahan and Lynch. And then you're just now getting into Demarcus Robinson and Kendrick Bourne, who's already proven that he could, if needed, could be your X in a game. Maybe not for the whole season as a top-level X, but for a game, he put up 10 and 142. So I'm just going through the list here. If they get to 100% health, they'll have too many guys to fit onto the roster. But I think the understanding is that is a golden goose kind of situation in the NFL. You don't get to that point, but it's better to have more depth. It's better to have that problem than the other way around.
David, this team's off to a 4-1 start, and I think there were relatively high expectations because of the fact that this 49ers team was up against a last-place schedule. They were getting a lot of guys back who'd been injured a season ago, and yet they've dealt with a ton of injuries thus far this year. George Kittle has been hurt. Brock Purdy's been in and out of the lineup. Nick Bosa's out for the season with an ACL tear. What is realistic for the 49ers to think about in terms of their big picture goals as they try to build upon this hot start, while also keeping in mind the reality that some of their best players might not be available for a lot of or all of their most important games this season?
Well, here, I'll tell you how they've performed so far from an analytical standpoint. They're the number 16 overall team, and there's 32 teams. It's because their defense has been about average. Their offense has been a little bit above average. and their special teams unit is ranked number 30. And this is according to, I'm not going to get into the complicated formulas, but these are actually really predictive numbers for how the team will perform in the future. And so anyway, when you aggregate all those numbers and you say number 16 overall, you would expect a record of about 500, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're right in the middle of the pack. However, they're 4-1, which by extension leads you to deduce that they have stolen at least a game, right, to get to where they're at right now. We saw them steal a game against the Rams. That's a game that if you played 100 times, they probably only win twice.
Yeah.
Like it's that's how overmatched they were. That's how impressive. I'm not saying they got lucky. Of course, there's always going to have to be something that bounces in your favor in an NFL game. But I think that it also speaks to just how resilient this team has been. They have found ways to win instead of finding ways to lose, which is something they did in 2024. They found ways to win against Arizona. They found ways to win against the Seattle Seahawks in week 1. And by the way, both Seattle and the Rams, both teams the 49ers have beaten on the road, are top 5 teams in the efficiency rankings. Anyway, you cannot expect the way that the 49ers have won to be 100% sustainable, especially if you get to the playoffs and you start talking about games against elite competition on a week-in, week-out basis. The numbers, efficiency-wise, the 49ers are putting up are going to have to get stronger for them to have a legitimate Super Bowl chance. And the good news there is what they've done so far, I think, is the floor, because they've been missing like 6 starters, right? So the path forward for the 49ers is to get healthier, improve the efficiency numbers, get up into the top 10, maybe even the top 7. We'll look at this by split, right? By the end of the season, we'll see, okay, where are they week 8 and beyond, since they have a bunch of guys back, theoretically. And if those numbers are in the top 5, top 7 of the league, they have just as good of a shot as anybody, really, to win it all. It's about getting into the tournament. And that's the glory of their 4-1 start, is even with number 16 efficiency numbers, they've put up a top 5 record. And that means they're stashing money into the bank. Yeah. That means they could, all these wins count in terms of playoff positioning, in terms of playoff qualification. And nobody cares if you got those wins shorthanded or by the skin of your teeth. If you're at better health at the end of the season when you enter the playoffs, they will help you with your seeding. And then I think that the sky can really be the limit for the 49ers, because with Purdy and with the weapons we talked about, they can have a top 5 offense. I think that's obvious based on past performance with those guys available. Then it's a matter of how much can Robert Saleh coach up this defense, and if they could potentially trade for an edge rusher to replace Nick Bosa. Can they get that defense in the top 12? We'll see. And then can special teams not screw it up? That's another we'll see. But if they can answer all 3 of those questions, they've got just as good of a shot as anybody at winning this thing. And that's what the NFL has created with all the parity in this league.
Yeah, last one real quick for you, just to kind of zoom out a little bit and not focus solely on the 49ers. We've seen the Seahawks, we've seen the Rams, we've seen the Cardinals up against San Francisco. Is this NFC West a little more difficult than you thought it might be at the beginning of the season?
Yeah, I think that Seattle, especially, Sam Darnold's playing at a really high level. I know they lost to Tampa Bay, but he was on fire for all of that game except for the very final interception. So what Darnold has brought so far, if he can sustain playing the way that he's playing, that's a really, really difficult out. And it makes the week 1 win for the 49ers on the road all the more impressive, the fact they are able to bottle that up. The Rams are really good. We'll see if Matthew Stafford can stay healthy. And, the reason I say that is because he was dealing with back issues at age 37 entering this season. But if he can stay healthy, the Rams are the team that we saw the other night. Very dangerous. They obviously committed a checklist of errors that allowed an underdog to win, but you can't count on that on a week-in, week-out basis. I think Arizona is clearly the worst team in this division, but they too dangerous enough to beat you on any given night. I mean, we saw them push the Seahawks to the limit and the 49ers, although the 49ers were really beaten up. But I think that it's no slouch, right, in Arizona. I think it's a team that can win on any given Sunday. So this might be the NFC North of 2024. It's the NFC West of 2025, a division with 3 really bona fide playoff teams at the very top.
Yeah, very well said. David, thank you so much for joining us here on this episode of Section 415, and we can't wait to have you back on later this season.
Heck yeah.